The sun had barely risen when a peculiar figure appeared at the edge of Lekki Phase 1, sitting quietly on a weather-beaten wooden bench outside a busy roadside Accra joint. His wrapper was stained with dust, and his feet, covered in plastic slippers with holes, looked like they hadn't seen comfort in years. People passed by without sparing him a second glance. Another old beggar lost in the swell of Lagos hustle. But there was something odd about this man. Despite his appearance, he sat with a regal poise, his eyes sharply observing everything. When a young banker threw him a 50 naira note like a curse, the man chuckled softly. Beneath the worn clothes and fake limp, Chief Adebayo Oluwatimi, one of the wealthiest men in Nigeria, was playing the role of his life. Known for owning oil blocks, luxury estates, and even a private island, he was now a self-imposed vagrant with a mission: to find a woman who could love his only son, Daniel. Not for wealth, but for heart. Daniel had everything: brains, looks, and charm, but he treated marriage like a prison sentence. So Chief Oluwatimi decided to intervene, the old-fashioned way. He scanned the area as the aroma of frying bean cakes floated in the air. That was when he saw her. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, was serving customers with both hands moving like clockwork. Her name tag read Zara. She had deep brown skin, a tired but kind face, and despite the chaos, she made time to smile at the customers, even him. Unlike others who ignored or mocked him, she gently approached him with a steaming nylon bag. "You look hungry, Baba," she said with a sincere tone, offering him 3 pieces of akara and a small sachet of pure water, for free. Chief Adebayo felt his throat tighten. This girl, with her simple wrapper and cracked phone tucked into her waist, was different. "Thank you, my daughter," he croaked, adjusting his fake accent. She smiled again before walking away, not knowing she had just impressed the most powerful man she'd ever unknowingly fed. A slow smile crept across the old man's face. He had found his first contender, but he couldn't rush. Zara had to be tested, watched, and trusted. The old billionaire reached beneath his fake blanket, where a real diamond-studded Rolex still clung to his wrist. He turned it slowly, like a timer ticking down. The game had begun. Chief Adebayo returned to the same bench the following morning, this time with a slight twitch added to his performance. His gray beard, powdered to look even whiter, bristled in the morning breeze. The aroma of fried akara once again filled the air, and right on cue, Zara was there, neatly dressed in her faded yellow apron, hair tied back in a scarf, and a cheerful hum on her lips as she set up her table. She hadn't forgotten him. "Good morning, Baba," she said as she handed him another small portion, this time with 2 extra akara balls. "You looked weak yesterday, so I added more today." Her voice was genuine. No pity, just care. Chief Adebayo's heart stirred again. This girl reminded him of his late wife, who had once offered him soaked gari under the rain when he was just a mechanic's apprentice. Could it be fate circling back? But he wasn't ready to trust too soon. He had watched too many women morph from saints to serpents once they sniffed wealth. So, as he chewed quietly, he asked in a low voice, "Why do you help someone like me when others walk past?" Zara's response was simple. "My mother always said, you don't give because you have, you give because you can." She dusted her hands on her apron and walked off again, leaving him stunned. Later that day, Chief Adebayo changed into his real self for a board meeting at his company headquarters in Victoria Island. Dressed in a custom blue kaftan, his personal driver whisked him away in a black Maybach. But all through the meeting, his mind lingered on Zara. She was educated. He had overheard her mention a polytechnic degree to a customer. And yet, she chose to fry akara. Why? Was it poverty or pride? That night, he summoned his longtime personal assistant, Kunnel, and handed him an envelope. "Discreetly investigate this girl. Zara sells akara in Lekki by the total filling station. I want to know where she lives, who she lives with, her daily habits, everything. Cunnel blinked in confusion, then nodded without asking questions. After all, working for Chief Adebayo meant keeping secrets and never questioning madness that had meaning. By midnight, files on Zara began to roll in. She lived in a one-room apartment with her sick younger brother, worked 2 jobs, and paid hospital bills with what little she made. Chief Adebayo sat alone in his penthouse, looking out over the city lights. For the first time in years, he whispered a quiet prayer. Let her be real. The first piece of his plan was in place. Next, he needed to bring his son, Daniel, into the picture, without him suspecting a thing. Daniel Oluwatimi wasn't the type to blend in anywhere. Not because he craved attention, but because he exuded it effortlessly. At 34, he was a striking man with caramel skin, tightly coiled hair, and sharp eyes that seemed to scan and dismiss people in one glance. Women adored him. His Instagram DMs overflowed with invitations, flattery, and desperation. But none of it moved him. Despite his father's growing frustration, Daniel had sworn off marriage after a bitter heartbreak 5 years earlier. Love is a scam, he often muttered, while sipping aged whiskey alone on his balcony. His father had tried subtle matchmaking, blind dates, and even business-themed weddings disguised as networking events, but Daniel dodged them all with cold elegance. So, when Chief Adebayo invited him for brunch one Sunday at his Banana Island mansion, Daniel assumed it was just another veiled attempt to force a bride into his arms. He was wrong. That morning, his father shocked him. I want you to shadow a new NGO project I'm funding, Chief Adebayo said calmly. We're feeding the underprivileged in Lekki. It'll help your public image. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Feeding beggars? Yes, his father replied. And I want you to start tomorrow. Reluctantly, Daniel agreed. Anything to escape another parade of gold diggers in gelly and heels pretending to love him. The next day, dressed in plain clothes and escorted by his father's discreet security team, Daniel arrived at the bustling street near the total station. The air was filled with the sizzle of hot oil, the sharp calls of hawkers, and the blaring horns of impatient danfos. His clean sneakers stepped over puddles as he glanced around awkwardly. Then he saw her. Zara. She stood like a beam of sunlight in the middle of the chaos, serving customers with the rhythm of someone who had mastered struggle. Daniel's gaze lingered on her. Not just because she was beautiful, but because she wasn't trying to be noticed. She didn't even glance at him. No dramatic eye flutter. No fake smile. Just a tired girl feeding the street. Something about that irritated and intrigued him at once. You're not from here, she finally said without looking up, catching him off guard. You don't smell like engine smoke or sweat. Daniel chuckled, unsure how to respond. Guilty, he said. I'm just volunteering. Zara nodded. Then you better wash your hands. You're about to serve hot akara to hungry mouths. And just like that, she handed him a spoon, pulled him behind the table, and tossed him into her world. Unaware that this volunteer was worth billions, and that both their lives were now being watched from a hidden SUV across the street. Daniel stumbled through the first 30 minutes like a tourist lost in the wild. His hands, used to luxury watches and glass-topped desks, fumbled clumsily with the hot spoon and sizzling oil. Twice, he burned his finger. Once, he dropped an entire scoop of akara batter into the sand, earning a groan from a waiting customer. But Zara didn't laugh. She didn't mock him. She simply raised an eyebrow and said, You have soft hands. Too soft for street work. But they'll toughen up. Something in her tone sparked something in Daniel. Annoyance, pride, curiosity. No one spoke to him that way. Most women tried to impress him with charm or careful admiration. Zara, on the other hand, treated him like a reluctant apprentice. Over the course of the morning, she began assigning him small tasks. Washing the bowls, portioning onions, bagging the akara. Daniel noticed that she never begged for customers, never chased attention. Yet people came to her stall like it was a neighborhood shrine. He saw how she treated the beggars and the rich the same. She even shared some of their earnings with a crippled old woman in the next alley. Slowly, Daniel's judgment of her began to shift. This wasn't just a girl with fried snacks. This was a woman with fire. From across the street, inside a tinted black SUV, Chief Adebayo sat watching through binoculars like a general at war. Colonel, seated beside him, had a notepad filled with scribbled notes. She treats him no different from others, Colonel said. No visible flirtation. No sudden charm tactics. The old man smiled, folding his arms. Good. She doesn't know who he is. And that's how it must stay for now. It was the first time in years he'd seen his son laugh genuinely, burnt fingers and all. But he wasn't just watching for Zara's character. He was studying Daniel too. Would he recognize real value when it wasn't dressed in diamonds? Would he let down his walls for a woman who offered nothing but honesty and grit? The old billionaire sipped from a flask of ginger tea and leaned back. This is the only way he'll marry someone real, he muttered. Let him fall in love the hard way. As the sun dipped and customers thinned, Daniel found himself still standing beside Zara, both of them stained with oil and sweat. So, she asked, wiping her brow, will you run away after today, or are you coming back tomorrow? Daniel smirked, surprising even himself with the words that came next. Same time tomorrow. Zara grinned slightly, then turned away. Behind her back, Daniel was already watching her. Not with a billionaire's eyes, but with something warmer and far more dangerous. By the third day, Daniel no longer stumbled. His hands had found rhythm, his feet adjusted to the oily ground, and his shirt, once white and ironed, now bore oil spots like scars of humility. The street had a way of softening even the most pampered souls, and Daniel felt it in his bones. Zara noticed too. She didn't say it outright, but she watched him more closely, especially when he offered extra akara to a limping boy or shielded the table with a nylon sheet during a sudden drizzle. Something was changing. He wasn't just that fresh guy pretending to care. He was trying. Still, Zara kept her walls up. Every evening, she packed quickly and left without fanfare. Daniel once offered to walk her home, but she declined politely, saying, Lagos is safer when you move like shadow. He laughed at the time, but that sentence stayed with him. She was hiding something. He could feel it. That evening, unable to resist, he followed her from a distance. Through alleys, across muddy footpaths, past yelling neighbors and hawkers, until she reached a crumbling brown building with broken window panes and a small pharmacy sign flickering outside. He watched as she entered one of the doors, disappearing into darkness. Inside the room, Zara placed a bag of medicine on the floor beside a squeaky mattress where her younger brother, Timmy, lay coughing weakly. He was only 15, but had been battling a recurring lung infection that local clinics had failed to fully diagnose. Zara knelt beside him, wiped his forehead, and fed him crushed antibiotics with a spoonful of pap. Timmy smiled faintly. You smell like akara again, he joked. She laughed, but it was the tired kind. The one you force so no one sees your breaking point. You'll get better, she whispered. We just need time. She didn't know that outside, in the shadows of a broken gate, Daniel was standing still, unsure what to do. He hadn't expected to see this. The weight she carried, the poverty she disguised with pride, the brother she hid behind strong smiles. His chest tightened. This wasn't a game anymore. It wasn't charity or flirtation. This was a girl fighting battles alone. That night, he returned home silently, ignoring his father's questions at dinner. But Chief Adebayo already knew. Colonel had been 2 steps ahead, and the surveillance photos lay waiting in a brown envelope on his desk. The old man didn't open it. He didn't need to. Instead, He smiled quietly and whispered, "Now let's see how deep Daniel is willing to go." The next morning, Daniel arrived earlier than usual, long before the first customer. Zara looked surprised, but didn't question it. "You're getting used to the hustle," she said with a smirk as she handed him a bowl of washed onions. But Daniel was quieter today. His eyes scanned her tired face, and every oil stain on her apron seemed heavier now that he knew what she returned home to. He wanted to ask her about her brother, about the faded building she vanished into every evening, but he stopped himself. She was proud, fiercely so, and any intrusion might shatter the fragile trust they were building. Instead, he offered help in other ways. He fixed the leg of her wobbly table, brought an extra umbrella in case it rained, and when she wasn't looking, secretly paid off the street touts who harassed her daily for stall dues. Each gesture he made was quiet, intentional, never grand. Zara noticed the changes. She couldn't explain why, but the strange, soft-spoken volunteer was beginning to feel like a partner. One evening, after packing up, she turned to him and said, "You don't talk much about yourself. Who are you really?" The question hung between them like smoke. Daniel hesitated, then replied, "Just a man trying to be useful." Meanwhile, Chief Adebayo sat alone in his mansion, sipping pepper soup while staring at a framed photo of Daniel's late mother. "He's falling, Folake," he whispered to the frame. But will he fall far enough? His plan was working, but he knew how delicate love was, especially when built on half-truths. Across town, Cunnell sat in his car outside Zara Street, delivering medicine anonymously through a trusted pharmacist. It was the chief's quiet way of keeping Timmy alive while remaining invisible. But things were shifting. Daniel no longer needed prompting. He was making extra trips to the stall, skipping meetings, and ignoring high society events to be with Zara. He watched her, listened to her, laughed at her dry jokes, and started eating akara with pepper like he'd been raised on it. But despite the growing bond, a storm brewed quietly inside him. Each day, he felt guilt tighten around his throat. How could he look her in the eye and pretend to be someone he wasn't? The billionaire's son was slowly drowning in the world of a girl who didn't know he had a driver, a duplex, and a trust fund the size of a national budget. And the scariest part? He didn't want to leave that world anymore. Zara's stall had become more than just a roadside hustle. It had become a sanctuary. And Daniel was now part of its rhythm, blending into the background of her daily grind like he belonged there all along. He had stopped wearing his luxury sneakers and designer cologne. Now he showed up in slippers and t-shirts, always on time, always ready to work. But the more comfortable he got, the more dangerous his silence became. He wanted to tell her the truth, about who he really was, what his father had planned, and the reasons behind it all. But every time he looked into her trusting eyes, he froze. One wrong word, and she'd see him as just another rich man playing with her life. That week, Zara's stall drew in new customers, thanks to a viral food blog that randomly featured her akara. She didn't know that Daniel had orchestrated the write-up anonymously, paying the blogger to discover her. Business doubled, but with success came tension. Zara was struggling to balance everything. Timmy's worsening cough, increased demand at the stall, and now, Daniel's quiet presence that felt more intense with every smile. One afternoon, just as they were cleaning up, a sleek black SUV pulled up across the street. The driver stepped out and called Daniel by his full name. "Mr. Daniel Alyawatami, sir. Your meeting is in 30 minutes. Zara froze. The man wore a corporate suit, held a tablet, and looked visibly confused to find Daniel in an apron. "Sir?" he repeated. Daniel's face turned pale. Zara stared at him, her brows knitted in disbelief. "What did he call you?" she asked slowly. Daniel opened his mouth, but the truth came rushing before the words could. The driver, now noticing the crowd forming, added, "Your father sent me." He said to remind you that you have to sign off on the Ikoyi property before 6. Zara stepped back, her hands falling from the bowl she was holding. Ikoyi? Property? Her voice was sharp, eyes narrowing as reality unraveled. Daniel looked at her helplessly. Zara, I was going to tell you. But she didn't wait. She pulled off her apron and dropped it on the table. So this was a joke? An experiment? Are you one of those spoiled men trying to prove you can touch poverty and return to your palace? Her voice trembled, but her feet were steady as she walked away. The street was quiet. Even the Acra oil sizzled in silence. Daniel stood rooted in place, the apron still tied to his waist, while everything he had built with her over weeks fell apart in seconds. Zara didn't show up the next day, nor the one after that. The Acra stall, usually alive by sunrise, stood folded and silent, the table covered with a black tarpaulin and the burners cold. Daniel came early and waited late, pacing the sidewalk like a man who had lost direction. Customers asked questions. He had no answers. The absence felt heavier than rejection. It felt like banishment. Every attempt to call her led to a switched-off phone. He visited her building, but couldn't bring himself to knock. He didn't want to invade her space again. Not after how much she had already given without asking anything in return. Instead, he left a brown envelope with a pharmacist downstairs. Inside it, money for Timmy's treatment and a handwritten note. I came as a lie, but I stayed because you were the truth. He signed it simply as Daniel. But Zara never came to pick it up. She had taken Timmy to stay with a friend in Suralire. Far from the stall, far from Daniel, and far from anything that smelled of betrayal. In her mind, it didn't matter what Daniel's intentions were. He had played with her life the way rich people always did, disguising power to access what wasn't theirs. Chief Adebayo sat in his home office, holding Cunnell's latest report like a fragile glass. The old man had expected fallout, but not this kind of silence. Daniel had been a wreck for days, quiet, restless, barely eating. And Zara? Vanished, unreachable. The chief leaned back in his chair and stared at the portrait of Daniel's late mother again. Maybe I pushed too hard, he whispered. Maybe we've already lost her. Cunnell stood nearby, hesitant. Sir, should we intervene? Speak to the girl? But Chief Adebayo shook his head. If she doesn't choose him on her own, it defeats everything. Meanwhile, Daniel made one final move. He opened a foundation in Zara's name, the Z Initiative, focused on feeding low-income communities, providing basic health care, and supporting young caregivers like Zara. He didn't announce it with press or cameras. He just made sure the first delivery of food supplies reached the exact street where Zara had once stood in her yellow apron. But the ache in his chest didn't fade. She had made him feel like a real man in a fake world, and now that she was gone, every luxury he owned felt empty. He stood alone in his walk-in closet that night, surrounded by $1,000 suits and designer colognes, whispering the same question again and again. Will she ever forgive me? Weeks passed like shadows, long, quiet, and without warmth. Zara spent her days helping a friend run a roadside thrift stall in Suralire, far away from the frying pans, the oil burns, and the man she'd allowed too close. Timmy's cough had improved slightly thanks to donated medication left anonymously at a local clinic. She had her suspicions, but she ignored them. She didn't want to think about Daniel, about his lies, his charm, or the way he'd made her laugh without trying. But fate had a habit of knocking when you least wanted company. It came in the form of a woman, elderly, regal, and kind-eyed, who showed up at the thrift stall one afternoon. She introduced herself as Mama Folake, a retired school principal who now ran a small girls' literacy program. I was told you're good with children and very disciplined, the woman said. Zara nodded slowly. She had no idea who had given the recommendation. Someone said you're the kind of woman Lagos can't break, Mama Folake added, then smiled. That someone was my old friend, Chief Adebayo Oluwatimi. Zara froze. The name hit her like a slap. I don't know him, she replied stiffly, turning away. But the woman didn't leave. Instead, she gently pulled a photo from her purse. It was of Daniel, much younger, standing between two parents in front of a mansion. Zara recognized the eyes immediately. He's not who you think he is, the woman said. Yes, he's rich. Yes, his father meddled in a foolish way. But that boy, he stayed with you long after the game ended. And he's been doing things for you without ever asking for credit. Zara stared at the picture, her breath shallow. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Mama Folake sighed. Because you remind the chief of his late wife. And because Daniel hasn't smiled since you left. That night, as the city lights blinked on and Danfo horns faded into the background, Zara opened her cracked phone and did something she hadn't done in weeks. Searched Daniel Oluwatimi online. The first thing she saw was news of a foundation launched in her name. Photos of children being fed, clinics getting support, and Daniel, wearing the same shirt he used to fry akara in, shaking hands with market women. There were no press interviews, no speeches, just action. Her fingers trembled as she closed the phone. She had run from deception. But was it possible that beneath the lie had been the most honest version of a man she'd ever met? The morning air in Lekki felt different. It carried with it the scent of memories, akara oil, laughter, and unspoken emotions. Daniel stood in front of the empty stall he once shared with Zara, hands in his pockets, unsure why he still came. Maybe it was hope, maybe guilt. Or maybe it was because that street corner had become more of a home than all the houses he'd ever lived in. He was about to turn away when a voice behind him said, You're not very good at letting go, are you? He spun around, breath-catching. There she was, hair pulled back, dressed simply in a navy blue top and jeans, standing with arms crossed but eyes soft. For a moment, Daniel said nothing. He looked at her like she was a ghost. Something beautiful and haunting that he wasn't sure was real. I wasn't sure you'd come, he finally said. Zara gave a faint smile. Neither was I. They stood in silence, the noise of Lagos humming around them. Finally, she asked, Why didn't you tell me the truth? Daniel looked down. Because I was afraid that once you knew who I was, you'd stop seeing me. Zara's expression didn't change, but her eyes shimmered slightly. I didn't fall for your clothes or your name, Daniel. I fell for the man who burned his hand trying to flip akara and still came back the next day. He stepped closer. I was never supposed to feel anything. My dad. He disguised himself as a beggar just to prove something. I played along. But then you showed up, and I forgot it was a game. His voice cracked slightly. I didn't come to pity you. I came looking for meaning. And I found you. Zara inhaled slowly, her walls beginning to crack. You could have left. But you stayed. I couldn't leave, he said. Because for the first time in my life, someone saw me before my bank account. She walked past him, brushing her fingers along the edge of the stall table. You built a whole foundation in my name. Daniel shrugged. I thought the world deserved more of you, even if you never spoke to me again. There was a long pause. Then she turned to him and whispered, Next time, just come as you are. No masks. He nodded. I will. If there's a next time. Zara took a breath, then reached out and adjusted the apron that still hung on a nearby nail. We open again tomorrow, she said. Be early. Thanks for watching, family. Please do like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Also turn on post notification to get more exciting stories from us.